Hello everyone, my name is Bryce Kho. I am an illustrator and concept artist. Today, I'm going to be showing you the sketchbook that I filled out in the last month. These ones specifically are like the 3-minute warm-up poses. They're done in a Kuretake Gansai Tambi, and it's just a little watercolor palette. I liked this spread in particular just because the poses are so short, but I tried to lay out the composition so that it felt like an action was happening. And one of the things that I would take away from it is, hey, this gave me an idea for an illustration I might want to do in the future. I was like, oh, it's cool because you can capture many characters doing many dynamic poses and get a sense of motion by doing something like this. So every once in a while, even if it's just practice, it might prompt an idea that you find useful for something else. So from the same session, these are like 5-minute poses. I do this in the watercolor mostly because I come from a background of just wanting to get it done as quickly as possible. Doing watercolor is one of the fastest ways to get value on the page. So rather than doing pencil and kind of like having to slowly render in one little sketch at a time, you just load up your brush real heavy with a lot of water and a lot of ink, and then you're good to go to kind of get these bigger gestural marks on the page. When it's most loaded, you're gonna do the things that are gonna be darkest. And as you start having that water come into the brush, you're gonna do these bigger strokes. As you lose more and more of that ink, you can go back in with those softer values. Anytime that you see the color blocking behind the character, that's when I decided to revisit that page, and adding the background behind it allows me to reshape and fix things with the outer contour of the character that, you otherwise would look like a mistake, but actually when you do this and like I add like an edge here on the hat, it looks like it's a highlight and it looks intentional. And as someone who kind of does these incomplete drawings, it like actually matches the aesthetic. This is a really fun way to make these drawings more polished and learn something about how form and highlights can change a drawing. There's normally a big disconnect between really loose drawings, right, and a finished illustration. And I've always kind of had those as two separate skill sets within the work that I do. Going back and trying to polish up these drawings, I think I've gotten a better understanding of what the core of some of these sketches is. In particular with this one, I really hated this drawing. And I'm sure we all feel that way about some of the ones that we do when we're studying. And so like the act of taking something that you don't like, transforming it into something that you're at least okay with, or at least that you learned something new with, it means that nothing is truly lost. It's not like wasted time. Like you can take something that was frustrating and learn more from it than just the act of that initial practice. So this is the travel set that I've been using for this entire book. And so it came with this watercolor brush pen and another black pen, but I didn't really use that pen specifically. I mostly just used this one. It's a brush with a tube of water. And so basically when you squeeze it, a little bit of water will come out so that you can use these hard watercolors to just get value on the page. Within figure drawing, sometimes I get bored of using that same medium. So this is one where I used a Kuretake emoji pen. As I was saying before, like when I do some of my illustration work, a lot of it is just with inks. It's with these kinds of drawings that I have learned most of how I understand color. So with this palette, you'll notice it's like really messy. And when I'm drawing, I normally intentionally will get like 3 different colors on my brush. And it's really fun because basically as you're working, the last color that you loaded up will be present, and then it will gradually become the colors that you mixed previously. And so you naturally get gradients and kind of pops of color that you might not expect. And those unexpected decisions are what teach me like, oh, I like this, I'm gonna do more of it. For a certain thing, I might try a new color combination. These are probably like 3 to 5 minute poses. So I'm not thinking of them as being too precious. When I know a pose is gonna be like 10 to 15 minutes long, then I might be like, oh, I want it to be like an actual illustration. This one is more like, let's just fill it up. We took my son to the Natural History Museum here in Los Angeles. Same palette here. I feel like this is one where it turned out pretty well. I'm feeling good. These 2 colors, which I would normally think wouldn't come out with an aesthetic drawing, are like, I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna see if I can make it work. Once you develop a thing that you're used to, that routine, that can be like a plateau if you don't reach beyond it. So intentionally touching things that you don't think would work and trying to make them work, those sorts of challenges are really exciting to me. I always advocate to people who ask me how I got better or how I learned my fundamentals, that figure drawing for me is that safe space to play and learn and focus on developing the new sorts of ideas or sharpening up my fundamentals. My favorite drawing on this page was this one. People often ask me how I decide where to leave white space. I'm trying to get this drawing done as quickly as possible, and I want to focus on the things that are interesting. It means actually skipping everything that I feel I can skip. So this line on this face, What I found was when I just did the bare minimum for those things that I thought were interesting, it was kind of fun to leave that space open and imply those forms. This is from the same session and it's the same model. As I was drawing it, I had a new idea. What if I use the poses that she's having in this random order and try to compose them on the page to make a scene? As I was drawing them, I was thinking like, how will I connect these poses to make some sort of story happening? In this particular case, it's clear that she's the focal point and that she's where the other characters are looking so that some sort of exchange can be happening story-wise. Then later, I decided, oh yeah, what's the conversation that's happening? How can I make this into a scene? And then adding a background that kind of makes them share the same space. And then by modifying a little bit of the costume, I can make her into a completely different character. Just giving each of these people a different identity. This was really exciting for me. These are back to 5-minute poses. One thing that I didn't even notice when I drew this character is that her head was probably too flat. But then when I drew this outline around her, I was like, hey, that actually can become both a highlight and create form. It's simple. It's like, yeah, add a background behind your character and leave negative space for where you might have like a blown out highlight. Like that concept is simple, but combining it with a loose drawing, it added a new level of possibility to any given drawing. That sort of efficiency in practice for me is like what I'm always thinking about. This session was probably my favorite figure drawing session of all time. The way that I think I trained myself most with figure drawing was having a volumetric focus on the model. That really just means like breaking down what I'm seeing in the shapes I do understand. So like the knee here, right? So that line, that cross contour that's going along her thigh, it reveals the cylinder shape there, right? And so understanding that as a simple cylinder makes that shape less intimidating and makes it easier and more clear for me to know what I'm doing. Bringing that understanding to everything that I'm drawing in figure drawing, where it's like, what is the underlying shape? How do I reveal it as simply and as quickly as possible? Or as, just making every line convey as much volume as it can. That's what it's all about for me. And then 2 would be like feeling the emotion and trying to convey some more character. The first ones were 3s, and then these are 5s. But this one with the background, I did touch it up later. This is an example here of like, okay, I don't think she needs much more of a silhouette for the negative space, but like adding that flourish of flowers. Once you've memorized how to draw a flower and so that you can manipulate it, it's always decorative and fun and makes this feel like it could turn into a finished illustration if I really wanted it to. Here are, I believe, the 10-minute poses. This pose, getting this angle on her underarm, you don't get to see that when you look at photos, I feel like. It's one of those things where having that live person in front of you and just that a little bit of ability to move your head around and get that extra information, I think is so invaluable. I also think of figure drawing as a free space to explore style more. This one is a bit more of an anime comic influence compared to like more trying to capture likeness with maybe these two. Within your figure drawing practice, if you get to the point where you feel comfortable with capturing the pose and those volumes that I talked about previously, then figure drawing is also the place to push style because you have that freedom to simplify things because you don't have enough time. And so it's more about like, what is the essence of it? I could tell she was being ambitious with the pose, so I wanted to match her energy. And so I was like, what is she imagining that she's doing with that? And filling in the blank. Having to add in my own other half of the drawing. The first tiger I drew was awful. I just drew on top of it. It was like almost just a completely different drawing. That's where I'm plugging how I feel watercolor is such a valuable medium of like, people often are scared of it and think that it's unforgiving. This is an example of, no, just draw on top of it. You won't even notice. I think these are 7-minute poses. One of the simplifications that I did that I really liked was her dress was actually a crosshatch pattern. That was sufficiently clear how her clothing was warping as it was draping off of her. It's like, cool, it looks good. Just leave it at that. I can move on to other things. Oh, this one's probably my favorite out of the book. So this is one where I loved the pose so much that I was like, I'm gonna go way slower and be way more delicate with it. It was a 10-minute pose. The initial drawing was just the pink lines that you see. So a ton of negative space. Really, I just wanted to get the hand and the face and some of this draping down. I started with adding these patterns to the draped clothing because I thought that's a pretty safe way to make the essence of this image more heightened. You know, it is about like kind of a mysterious aura, right? I was like, I haven't painted in gold like that too often. And so it was like kind of a special treat to make this drawing more interesting. The feline anatomy is just so freaking confusing. I've drawn cats many times because I think of them as an interesting challenge, but mastering it is still beyond me. I just want to add it to my long-term visual library so that I would be able to do this on the fly. I just know through a lot of experience that I will eventually get it, and then that will be something I can just whip out and not think it's a big deal, but it's going to take a lot of trial and error. These are 5-minute poses. I actually loved this one. My first thought was, damn it, I should go move. But I was like, I should give it a fair shake. It's one of those situations where you're like surprised how much you liked a pose you thought was gonna suck. Actually, the amount of like personality that I felt like was coming through after I started drawing, I was shocked and surprised by. So I was like, I should really always give it a fair shot and tackle those things that you think you are gonna not enjoy and surprise yourself. I haven't done nude figure drawing since high school. I actually only did it for a summer at Cal Arts when I was in their Inner Spark program. It's such a different vibe. That might not be informational to you guys. Everyone in the room is way more serious. I think these are fives. 5 is how they start. And so there was so much information that I was like, dang, I don't know what I'm looking at. I have a lot more to learn here in this subject, and I was very pleasantly surprised. So this butt pose here, it was another one of those ones where when it's the back and I don't have the face to emotionally connect to, I'm like, this is gonna be boring. I'm not gonna be as interested in this, but there was just so much interesting muscle information happening. And I feel like that information is what fuels what I do everywhere else, where it's like, oh, now that I know this thing on the back of a pose can be beautiful, now it's captured up here and I want to try to share that with other people someday. This is the research that fuels other illustration work I do. He was posing like a badass, so I added the scars, made him look like he's like a chief. This is Dan Holland, who is an amazing artist who was sitting next to me. Some of these like more weird poses that we wouldn't think to draw in an illustration can sometimes like highlight parts of how that little bit of foreshortening that's happening here, that little bit of extra volume that you wouldn't normally capture, that in and of itself can be a beautiful thing. And so connecting with that, it's all seeds that are being planted for maybe future ways to express an idea. I think this next set of drawings, what it's about is like me trying to find a rhythm. The next thing I did was like, okay, I need to like loosen up a bit and draw faster and not so precious with what I'm doing. With this one, I was like, I'm going to try to capture the whole room in this like next set of like 20 to 25 minutes. I'm loading red and blue here. Like there's a little bit of blue in this first drawing. But then as it fades out, I'm adding less and less red onto my brush so that I get this natural gradient from red to blue. I'm finding a way to finding ways to keep things interesting. I did touch up this spread, even though I didn't add the backgrounds. Like this one had the sort of motion and flow that I was trying to convey. It's always super satisfying when you like really nail a really big long line. And I guess my advice for people who want to do that more is every once in a while, I will take the time to just study the model for like 10 to 20 seconds and be like sketching in my mind what that shape is going to be, taking that pre-visualization, seeing it on the page, almost like a measure twice, cut once kind of idea, and then just going for it. And that the confidence to do that is because I'm seeing this point and I'm seeing this point. And I'm going to be like, there's a muscle here, there's a little butt sticking out, and there's a little bit of a thigh there, there's the indent of the knee, and then I stick it. Drawings like this are when internally I'm like, drawing is a battle, man. Like I just feel like I'm fighting a war here and I don't know if I'm going to come out on top. That's like how it feels at least half the time. The challenge with this, I'll say in particular, is that the tip of this brush pen that I use for this entire book is pretty thick. For a drawing like this, what I'm doing is I'm just being extremely delicate with the amount of pressure. Over the course of the month, this tip became more and more dull. So that's also maybe related to the difficulty level of tackling this medium. Having a stronger, newer brush is helpful. If you guys yourselves are ever like stuck in a rut and you're like, nothing is going well, I'm frustrated, do something else. I find that particularly true for my approach to illustration work. Like when you have that perfect thumbnail in your head and you want to nail it so bad, but you've tried 5-6 times and it's not going well, the second you do something else, you're fresh. And that freshness is something that you might be able to like build up to revisit the idea you did want to touch. That's what you need to do. Like to be productive, which like I said is my whole MO, to get back into a place where you were feeling it and able to groove. For this page, I was like, I want it to be about the cast shadows. So the little bit of cast shadow from a buttocks or from her leg hitting the other leg, Like that was the thing I was interested in. And so I kind of like purposely would do the line drawing real quick in like more of a blue tone. And then once I finished the essence of the pose, I would load up more yellows and browns and reds to go back in and do some of these contour shadows and cast shadows. This is a really cool pose that she was doing. So when I think a pose is cool, I will try to reserve a lot more space for it, obviously. But then it can also mean that I'm so precious and slow with it that I actually lose the time that it would take to go back and add some of the more things I'm interested in. That's a balancing act. It happens to me all the time. These are some looser drawings, and I was hoping to fill it in with a pose here that I liked, but this was like kind of a gotcha for me for laying out where a pose will go, where after these two, I was waiting for a pose that would fit here and it never did. When I start a sketchbook, I always leave the first few pages blank because it just makes me feel like the sketchbook isn't ruined if our first page is bad. With these longer poses, I believe these were 10 and 15, I felt like the pose evoked the work of an artist I really like. Her name is Soy Milk, and she does like kind of that more like meaty, soft color palette, different like variations in skin tone. So that was what I wanted to get to. So I did the drawing as quickly as possible as far as the contour and lines, and try to give myself the time to play with more of the values within the form. That was really fun because I don't normally do that. Like if you guys see my work, this is me exploring territory that I'm more unfamiliar with. I just want to get something out of this session. I just want to learn something new. And so trying all the new stuff is the way that I feel like I'm trying to grind to level up my overall ability. The last spread is this inner page. And what I feel like was really cool is even though this is a Japanese watercolor, the milkier colors have a opaqueness to them that make them more like wash. So what that means is like you can go over something and actually fully kind of blot it out, like as like a more fresh, almost digital kind of feeling. The way that the value adds a creaminess and a softness to the form is like not something that I've touched much before. And so it was really exciting with these. I actually was able to really fix her shoulder. It might be hard to see on camera, but like I actually had her shoulder jetting out just a bit too much. Maybe it's like 10% too far out. But by adding this black background behind her after the session was over, I was able to kind of fix that, adjust the head shape as well. By adding the black in between the legs, it's like it really popped the form here forward to like add that three-dimensional element. It's literally just like the push and pull of value, making that thing come forward. That was really interesting to me. So overall, I just felt like this experience of filling out a sketchbook, trying to make every page about something new for myself, it was super informative and I learned a lot. My approach is as you might guess, is very informed by Kim Jung-gi, because the idea of volumes being the thing that allow you to have freedom to draw from imagination was what was most intriguing to me. My goal is like, I do want to draw from imagination, not just from figures, right? And so I want to capture those things for my long-term use. And that's where, once you understand a volume, like drawing a shadow for a cup or a cylinder, it makes it seem simple, even though it looks impressive when it's done in conjunction with a couple other ideas. I do concept art in illustrations. And so the book that I have at my booth is the Sea of Stars art book that is published by 3D Total. And then I also did doodles in the book. This just encapsulates all the work that I did for that game. I was the sole concept artist, and so I designed everything, all the characters, and I also did the illustrations for the project as well. Earlier this year, I went over to Proko Studios in San Diego and I filmed a course where I break down my process on a digital illustration. In that course, I go from start to finish on one of my illustrations. So if you want to know how I do more work that looks like this, that's what the course is more about. Thanks, guys.